When it comes to chess, Magnus Carlsen and Garry Kasparov are two of the most prominent and accomplished players in the history of the game. While both have made significant contributions to the world of chess, there are some notable differences between them. Comparison: Kasparov was at the peak of his career during the 1980s and 1990s. He became the world chess champion in 1985 and held the title until 2000. His dominance in the chess world was characterized by his aggressive and dynamic style of play. On the other hand, Carlsen's reign as world chess champion began in 2013, and he has successfully defended his title multiple times. He is known for his deep positional understanding and endgame skills. Carlsen's era of dominance has been more recent, extending into the 21st century. Talking of records and achievements, Kasparov held the record for the highest ELO rating in history, and his rivalry with Anatoly Karpov is legendary. He was a prolific tournament player and world champion, and his book My Great Predecessors is highly regarded. Carlsen, not to back down, is the youngest player to achieve the title of world chess champion at the time of his victory. He has consistently maintained the highest ELO rating, showcasing his dominance in the modern era. Carlsen's deep opening preparation is another aspect of his play that sets him apart. The only match played between them. Now, even if we go on to compare these two legends, we'll never conclude who's better than whom. So let's have a look at the only chess match played between them. Alright, so the match started and Kasparov was not to be seen anywhere. Kasparov finally made his appearance, but the stakes were incredibly high since he had already lost a lot of time on the clock. He arranged his pieces, and the match began with Magnus making the first move, pawn to d4. Kasparov responded with a queen's pawn opening, and Magnus continued by moving his pawn to c4, putting pressure on the black pawn. Kasparov chose to play pawn to c6, which is also known as the Slav defense, often used as a response to the queen's gambit. As the game progressed, Kasparov moved his knight to d7, and it soon evolved into a queen's gambit declined. Magnus solidified his control of the center by advancing a pawn to e3, focusing on the critical central squares. Kasparov, in response, moved his queen to a5, pinning Magnus's knight on c3. This move forced Magnus to defend against the pin by moving his other knight to d2, which weakened its impact on the center of the board. Kasparov then moved his bishop to b4, reinforcing the pin, and Magnus countered by placing his queen on c2 to protect his knights. Both players castled, and Kasparov decided it was time to initiate his attack by playing pawn to d4, seizing control of the center. However, Magnus responded with knight to b3, setting up a fork on the queen and pawn. This forced Kasparov to retreat and allowed Magnus to regain control of the center with a pawn capture. They continued to make exchanges in the center, enabling Magnus to position his bishop strongly on c4. At this point, both players were fairly even, with a slight advantage for Magnus, but the clock was running low. Kasparov pulled his queen back to c7, and Magnus responded by activating his rook. Kasparov then moved a kingside pawn to h6, forcing Magnus's bishop on g5 to retreat. In response, Kasparov moved the bishop to d6, putting Magnus's king in a precarious position. Sensing the danger of an imminent checkmate if Kasparov could get his queen to h2, Magnus pushed his kingside pawn to h3, creating some breathing room. The game continued, with Kasparov playing bishop to h2, checking Magnus's king. Magnus had to move his king without capturing because the queen was also threatening the same square. Kasparov then moved his knight in front of his queen, allowing Magnus to capture the bishop and trade pieces. 13-year-old Magnus Carlsen decided to go on the attack, moving his queen to c5 and advancing multiple pawns to target c6. They engaged in a series of piece exchanges, with Magnus ultimately gaining the upper hand by winning the exchange. The game continued with both players making aggressive moves. Kasparov moved his queen to g6, threatening to check Magnus, who responded by moving his queen to block and offering a queen trade. Kasparov accepted, giving him a small advantage due to Magnus having doubled pawns on the g-file. As the game moved closer to the endgame, both players continued to make precise moves, handing out checks and playing aggressively. Magnus improved his position and had almost a two-pawn advantage. They eventually shook hands and agreed to a draw, a remarkable accomplishment for Magnus Carlsen, proving that even at 13 years old, he could compete head-to-head with the reigning world champion. That indeed was a historic showdown between two chess titans. Magnus Carlsen and Garry Kasparov displayed their immense skills and strategic prowess in this epic game. If you enjoyed this deep dive into their unique playing styles and this remarkable match, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more exciting chess content.